Welcome to another presentation by Developer Nerd. Today we're going to talk about switching jobs, when and how to change jobs. Before I get into the presentation, though, this presentation actually came out of a discussion with my wife, who has been in the job market for a very long time and was kind of curious about looking again and seeing what's out there. And over the course of the years, I've been on both sides as the interviewee and the interviewer. And there's just so many different things that I hear people talk about when it comes to why they can't switch jobs or what they're looking for jobs. So I decided to kind of put together this compilation and I came up with this presentation. So let's begin. So typically, when you think about switching jobs, in a nutshell, getting that first career job can be the most extremely difficult and stressful thing you ever do. Doubly so when it comes to finding the next job. That's because so many people tend to stick with their first jobs for years because of a variety of fears and misconceptions about employment. Even those who don't stay with their first, second, or even third job also have fears about how they will be perceived by their next employer. Commonly, I've heard people say, well, I'll be branded as a job hopper. I'm money hungry, or I may not be skilled enough, or I might be perceived as a problem employee if I'm jumping around jobs too much. In some cases, this may be true, but in general, this is not the status quo. This even applies to those established in their jobs or who may have just been with the company for many, many years. These individuals will likely hit some types of glass ceilings, either in pay or upward mobility. In these instances, the individual may not have looked for a job in many years, and therefore they have no idea where to start or are just afraid to put themselves back out there again for fear of either younger talent or lacking their own personal skills. So, in this presentation, we'll dive into these fears and misconceptions and help break down some of the common problems one can encounter when considering to switch jobs. One of the biggest is understanding that it is time to switch a job. And that is one of the biggest problems a lot of people run into. They don't understand that it's time to switch a job, that they should move on to something else. So, what are we going to cover today? Well, our overview, we're going to look at some of the fears people have. What is your biggest fear? Why aren't you looking? Why don't you want to move on? Myths and misconceptions. We already briefly mentioned one, being a job hopper. Some companies see that, some don't. What things should you consider when looking to switch a job? Where should you start to look for your next job? How to prepare for your next job? This is critical for those that have not been looking for jobs in a long time, maybe have been stuck in their position for 10, 20, 30 years, or even those just starting out that have maybe worked at like fast food joints and now looking to kind of get their first career job. How do I prepare? How do I get into that job? And then finally, pulling the trigger, actually going out and taking that leap and moving on to the next job. So, what are some of the fears or common reasons people fear changing jobs? Well, one of the biggest ones, of course, is loss of income. If I switch jobs, how am I going to deal with the interim between the jobs when I'm not getting paid? Or will I make as much at the next job? Some of the other things people fear is loss of seniority or security. I have a job, I'm getting paid right now. I don't know if I take the next job if they will like me, if they'll keep me past that 60-day buffer period where companies can lay people off. Or seniority, I've been here for 10, 20 years. People respect me, people know me. I know what I'm doing. If I move to something else, will I still have that seniority? I'll have to rebuild everything. I won't be as comfortable in my job. Another one I've heard a few times is, what if my boss finds out I'm looking? Well, if your boss finds out you're looking, that will tell them one of two things. Either you're displeased in your current situation, you're unhappy where you're at, or in some cases, if the boss finds out, I mean, if you're in a hostile work environment or things aren't going well, they may be happy that you're looking because then they don't have to fire you and pay you unemployment. So sometimes that's a double-edged sword, having your boss find out. And it can happen, especially when you start sending your resume out or talking to different people. Sometimes they'll call your current employer Or, God forbid, in some small networking circles, your boss may know the boss or a manager that you're interviewing with. So they could just easily pick up the phone and call your previous manager and say, "Hey, what do you think about this person? Do you know they're looking?" That can happen. Just accept that it can happen. Understand that, yes, you may have to deal with that if the situation rises, but don't let that be your biggest fear for not going out and looking. Chances of that happening are very slim. Now, if you're in the office and you're shooting your mouth off that you're looking for jobs, your boss is going to find out. So if you keep it quiet and you're discreet about it, your boss probably won't find out about it. But if it does, just address it head on and deal with it. Another one to consider is, what if I don't like my next job? Well, that can perceivably happen. It's a risk. Anytime you do something different, I mean, you get in your car, you take the risk that someone's going to hit you. So, why are you afraid of taking that leap and getting the next job? Is it because of the loss of income? Is it just because you're not sure? Well, that just comes from lack of self esteem or just the fear of not wanting to change. Change is good. If you don't like your next job, well, move on to the next one. You don't have to stay put. Don't put yourself in the situation where, oh, I've changed jobs. Now I need to stay here for a while because it'll look bad if I jump again. No, I have been in situations where I have taken a job and within 30 days, I absolutely hated it and jumped ship and went somewhere else. I was asked about that in my next interview, and my answer was, well, I took the job under the pretense that it was going to be X. It ended up being Y. So, in a sense, it was a bait and switch situation where I was brought in to do one particular thing, and it wasn't. It was something totally different. And it was kind of outside my skill sets, yes, and I could have done it, but the environment that it was in was very hostile. No one really wanted me there or wanted that particular position. So you can run into situations like that. Embrace it. Just say, okay, this isn't a good fit for me. Move on. And be honest with your next interview. Don't delve on all the negatives. Just say, it wasn't a good fit for me. That's why I moved on to the next job. Another one, do I really want to start over? This can be a very hard question for those that have been in a job for 10, 20, or 30 years, or maybe even being close to retirement, and they're finding that their current job is either being phased out or they're just not satisfied anymore. And they really want to kind of start over or try something new. Well, you don't necessarily have to start over. You may, but you can embrace that as a challenge. Or if you don't want to start over, why don't you look for something that's more of a lateral shift? Something that is similar to what you're doing, but with enough differences that you won't be bored. Another one is, do I have enough experience to do something else? This can be a tricky one. So, if you're in the world of IT, going from one software shop to another has its benefits and it has its disadvantages. For example, if you're in a .NET shop, you probably don't want to jump over and go to a Java shop unless you're very versed in like C sharp and really understand the workings of Java. So going from a .NET to that, in that situation, you may not have enough experience. However, if you're a web developer, knowing PHP, some Java, maybe some .NET, and you're looking to expand your experience, you're probably going to want to move into something that you don't have full experiences in, but something that you can grow into. So if you're just out of college and you have some software development classes, sure, you're going to want to try to get into a software job that can expand on those. So you will come in without having all the expertise, but just make sure that you're applying for a job that's within your level. So if you're junior, you're probably going to want to take something where people are looking for something with 1 to 2 years of experience. If you're mid, probably about 5 to 6 years of experience. And if you're senior, you're probably looking past 6 years of experience. But again, that also depends on the technology. So if something's only been out for, say, 6 months, they're going to be looking for someone with just 6 months of experience. They're not going to be looking for someone with 2 to 3 years of experience. If they are, they don't know what they're looking for. Another one is, am I really ready to move up in my career? Sometimes people are afraid to move up or change jobs simply because that requires them to go from being a subordinate, someone who takes orders or works on jobs, and then they are now pushed into a more senior team lead like role or management role or VP role. That is extremely scary. However, in some industries and in some particular jobs, you have to move up that tier if you want to continue to grow or move up the ladder, or essentially if you want to break that pay scale. You may run into a situation where you hit that ceiling and you can't go any higher unless you move up. Now, you could be happy being a Walmart greeter for the rest of your life, making, $8 an hour. If it pays the bills and it makes you happy, it doesn't matter. If you enjoy doing it, you're fine. But if you want to move on and you want to continue to grow or move up the ladder, you're going to have to be prepared for things like that. You're going to have to be ready to move into some uncomfortable situations. And we'll discuss some ways you can deal with that in the next few slides. Some myths and misconceptions. So, a myth, a widely held but false belief or idea. The world is flat is one of those, or the pink unicorn. A misconception, a view or opinion that is incorrect because it is based on a faulty thinking or understanding. I pulled them in, but the pointy haired boss from Dilbert seems to fit that perfectly. Myths and misconceptions. Okay, so the next job can't be worse than this one. I hear that time and time again. And every time I hear it, I think back to a book by Irma Bombach, and the grass is not always greener except on the other side of the septic tank. Jumping jobs just because your current situation is not comfortable or you're just in a bad place, assuming that the next job is going to be better and you're just going to get out here and take the next thing that comes along, doesn't always work. You could be going from one bad situation to a worse situation. Now, that's not to say that every job you go to is going to be worse than where you're at. It just means that don't just jump ship and take the first thing that comes along just because you think the next job's going to be better. Another one, I need to stay in my current job for a couple of years. Otherwise, companies may see me as a job jumper or someone who doesn't stick around. Depending on your industry, this could be valid. However, in most situations, I have seen this as being completely false. Early on, especially if you're out of college, you may jump around jobs every few years just until you figure out exactly what you want to do. Some employers, yes, they may look at you and say, well, you don't know what you're looking for, you're just jumping around. That happens sometimes, but it's generally not the norm. Typically, especially in IT, where a lot of jobs are 6 months contract to hire or just contract, where a job may only last 6 months or a job may last 9 months. So the old conception that you have to stick around in a job for years on end really isn't there anymore. Especially with pensions going away and things like that, a lot of companies really don't have the incentives anymore to keep employees for longer periods of time. Another one, all jobs are the same, so why change jobs? Oh, that one just irks me. All jobs are not created equal. So you may have a job, say in healthcare, you're doing software development in a healthcare shop. Well, if you do the exact same job, but you're doing it for Amazon, totally different industry, totally different concepts, same technology, still applying the same skills, but the jobs perceivably are entirely different. From healthcare to sales, you're now dealing with products, you're now dealing with selling of merchandise, dealing with inventory control. It's a different animal. It can actually provide its own benefits, its own caveats as well. Whereas in healthcare, you have to deal with patient information, HIPAA, PCI compliance, other different layers. So not all jobs are equal. So you could go from one job doing one thing to another job doing the exact same thing, but in a different industry. It could be a totally different job. You could totally love working in healthcare versus working for sales. Or you could totally love working for Amazon or Google versus working for healthcare. I don't have enough experience to do something else. This is kind of more of a personal misconception. A lot of times you don't perceivably have the experience to move from one job to another. If you leave college and you basically took nothing but French classes and you now are linguistics speaking French as a translator, yeah, going from that speaking French, say, to speaking German, you may not be able to jump jobs as easily. However, if you stick to another language within the romancing languages like Spanish or some of the other ones, you could very quickly maybe pick up in 60 days a like Duolingo or a Rosetta Stone class, and you may be able to train yourself quickly on how to go from French to Spanish. So you may not have enough experience to do something else, but that doesn't mean that you can't teach yourself the experience to do something else, or at least enough experience in something to move on to something else. Case in point with software development. If you're a .NET developer doing C sharp, it does not take much to teach yourself the Java syntax and move from C sharp to Java. Maybe 6 months. For some very quick learners, it could take a couple weeks. So don't sell yourself short and think that you don't have enough experience to move on. And finally, for the myths and misconceptions, this one um, I hear from a lot of college graduates these days. I'll just wait until I find my dream job. Well, if you're new to the job market, corporate America, or you've been in it for a while, waiting until you find your dream job may never happen because you may not know what your dream job really is. The only way you figure out what your dream job is sometimes is to do many different things, to try multiple different jobs. Case in point, I graduated from college and I was like, okay, I am done with school. I am done with teaching. I will never set foot in the classroom again. I had to eat my words 6 months later. Ended up taking a job being an instructor. I taught A plus certifications, JavaScript certifications, and Microsoft Plus certifications for the next 6 months. Then after that, I ended up becoming a Java trainer for another year. So with that, I found that I actually liked teaching. I hated being a student, but I actually liked the quest for knowledge and the ability to learn new things. So if I had never taken the chance and just taken this teaching job for it being a job, I mean, I was a college grad and needed a job. So I took the first job that came along and it was interesting. I loved it. There were certain caveats of it I did not. And ultimately, I did end up going back into software development in the long run, but I found I did love teaching. And with this developer project that we've started, I find that this is kind of my niche. This is what I like to do. I still like developing software, but I also like teaching. So you never know what your dream job is. So waiting until you find your dream job is kind of an oxymoron. You just may never find it because you just don't know exactly what it is. So don't wait. So, some things to consider when switching jobs: compensation, commute time and distance, coworkers' personalities, type of industry you want to work in, the work environments, skills, and timing. Compensation. Show me the money. One of the famous lines from Jerry Maguire. Ultimately, money is not the be all end all of everything. And if you ever watch Jerry Maguire, you kind of find out that, at the end of the day, money isn't everything. Your family is the most important thing. So, really, compensation can be many different things, not just money. It really could be what is your driving motivation for switching a job. If it's money, you might want to just take a step back and really evaluate what you want out of life because jumping jobs just for money isn't always the best policy. Some other things you really should be looking at are retirement, 401k. Do they have retirement plans? Do they do matching of 401ks? Some of the hidden money and hidden gems of jobs are bonuses, 401k matchings. So if you get a 401k, it's tax free money. You put your money in at the beginning and they tax you at the end. But say you put in 8% of your money and the company matches that 100%, you're getting a free 8% of money every single paycheck. That was not in the initial negotiations. So even though one job may offer you 50,000, another one may offer you 50,000. If the second one offers you 50,000, but they'll do say a 14% match on your 401k, that one's a little more appealing. So just some things to mull over and think about. PTO and sick days. If you find you get sick at the change of season, say you get hay fever, you're going to have some sick days. So you want to make sure a company offers you some type of sick days or PTO. That way you can take time off from work and not worry about being dinged on salaries or lose money or get in trouble because you couldn't be at work that day. Or if you like to take vacations, you may want to take a job with a company that offers multiple weeks of PTO where you can take 2 to 3 weeks off, take a month off, take the family to Paris or go to Jamaica. My personal favorite, I love beaches. So I'm constantly going down to South Florida, the Bahamas, or Jamaica. Other perks or compensations, work from home. I don't have to travel anymore. I can save 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week, and just work from my home office, be around my family. I can cook, clean, do things and work from the house. Flex time. You may work in a high populated area. Well, what if your boss said, hey, you could come in and work from 7 to 3? That allows you to get in before rush hour and allows you to leave before your kids get out of school. And again, salary versus hourly. So you might be at an hourly job, which is great, but you have to work a lot overtime to get some of the benefits of the extra cash. Whereas with salary, it is a fixed income. And if you don't have to work a lot of overtime, then the salary might be a better option than hourly. However, sometimes salary employees have to work 60 plus hours a week. And then if you break that down to an hourly wage, sometimes that isn't as cost effective. So just some things to look at there with compensation. Commute time and distance. So is a longer commute worth the money and extra time? So if you currently work 5 minutes from home and you could walk to work, you don't have to pay for gas. You don't have to pay for the extra maintenance on your car. It's kind of the hidden costs of working and commuting. Will I need to travel? So some jobs do require you to fly or to travel from location to location. Is that worth it to you? Do you want to travel? Or is being away from home for long periods of time going to be an issue, especially if you have families and you have commitments? Or say you take your job 5 minutes from the house, you're now moving to the other side of town, maybe 10 miles, but that 10 miles now goes through 4 school zones, about 5 miles of interstate, and you're now looking at a 5 minute commute to an hour and a half commute. So you've now gone from, looking at 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day to 20. So you're looking at 10. So that's only 50 minutes a week if you work right by your house. Or if you're an hour and a half away, you're now looking at, about 7.5 hours a week just sitting in traffic. So if you like listening to music, great, but I'd rather do something else for 7.5 hours of my time or longer. I mean, that's basically a full work day. And also, if you're not used to driving to work or long distance to work, is the stress going to be a problem? The longer you have to commute, the more traffic and congestion you're in, you can show up at work a little more stressed than you used to be. And that additional stress over time can be differential for your health. Switching jobs, you now have to kind of learn to navigate your coworkers. You have to get along with people. So you are comfortable where you're at. You know who you work with. You may get along with all of them. You may not. Going to the next job, you're going to have to revisit these 4 topics. Getting along with new people. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Are you great at making new friends? Are you good at talking to people? Communication skills. Young versus old. If you're a young person starting at a new company, you may be intimidated. So you may have to work on your communication skills. Flip that around, if you're an older employee or looking, closer to the edge of retirement, looking to switch jobs, dealing with some of the younger talent that's coming up there, they may not respect you or they may see you as, your skills aren't as important or you're kind of past your prime. So these are things that you could clash with. Politics. Oh, this one is kind of a loaded topic, but politics is not just your political government affiliation. Politics could also be the way people perceive things. So if you are pro guns and you go work for an anti gun association, that's not, you're going to butt heads with your coworkers constantly. Same thing if you're pro choice or abortion. You got to avoid those things. So make sure that when you're changing jobs into a political, or you're not going to basically be hitting a political barrier where you're going. Now you can hit the fun barrier of like colleges and sports and alumni, But even that can be kind of stressful sometimes. For instance, when I first came to Nashville, the first company I worked for, the CEO was a Vanderbilt alumni. And I had gone to the University of Florida. And when we were allowed to wear our team shirts to work one day to support our colleges for the first week of the SEC. And when the CEO came down to talk to me about something, he realized I was a Florida fan. Well, for about a week, he wouldn't speak to me. So those are fun little things to deal with, but in a way, they can also be stressful. So you got to watch out for that. And language barriers. So you got to be careful about your language barriers. So if you work in a company where you really don't have to work with many foreign internationals or with many different people of different cultures, you may have a problem going from that company to a company that is very bilingual or has a lot of outsourcing or different people with different accents. So I've worked with a couple people that have never worked with an offshore team. And the first thing I hear when we get on some of these calls is, I can't understand them. Well, but I can understand them. And part of that, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, why can't you understand them? Well, part of it is I've been working with multiple different companies, multiple different outsourcing vendors, where over time, it's just second nature. Accents don't bother you anymore. Language barriers can still be a slight issue, but it it grows on you over time. You learn and you teach yourself how to understand people better. So if you haven't dealt with people with different languages or different accents, language can be an issue. So you got to be careful from going from one company to another. So make sure that when you're doing the interview process or you're talking to the next interviewee, make sure they bring in some other people you're going to work with. Make sure that you're going to get along with them. Make sure that you're not going to clash politically or language wise or just in general types of industries. I briefly touched on this before, but I've been working in for healthcare companies for years, and I've heard people around me also in the industry that has worked in healthcare for years say that, well, all I know is healthcare. I can't work in any other industry. For instance, like the auto industry, we have Nissan here, we have Bridgestone here, and there is nothing stopping any of us from going from healthcare to either of those companies or really into another industry. The only thing that may be stopping you is just if your skills can't translate. Most skills are cross industry as well as cross system. So, really, industry should not be a barrier unless you make it a barrier. Work environment. I love this one. So, Gilbert, I kind of pulled this guy. So, it's time for the sacred dance of the cubicle. So, working environments. Many different companies have many different working environments. Some are open concept where you can see everyone from one end of the floor to the other. You have desks kind of put together. Think back to like the old newsrooms where all the desks were next to each other, computers, typewriters. You could see everyone, you could talk to everyone. You pretty much hear everything going on. Then you have different types of environments with offices where you can close the door, have meetings behind closed doors. Cubicles, which can be fun, more often are annoying. It gives you a little bit of a conception that you have privacy, and it does tamper down some of the noise pollution from the open concept idea. Some type of work environments aren't just about the layout of the company. For instance, in IT, we have different environments where you have things like daily scrums, paired programming, where you have to work side by side with someone else. Or in other environments, are you required to work by yourself? Can you self manage yourself? Other things to consider in the working environments, is it business casual, suit and tie? Do I have to dress up every day? If you're coming from a current company where you can wear jeans every day, going to a new job where you have to wear slacks or even a suit every day can actually be a cost. It may not be a negative cost or a reason not to switch job, but you just have to bear in mind that, okay, hey, to switch jobs immediately, it's going to cost me X number of dollars for a new wardrobe to go to this new job. So before I do that, I have to make sure I have some money. How do they communicate? This could be things like phone, email, messenger, and Skype. Some companies I've worked at, we did everything face to face, by phone, and through some variations of email. Other companies I've worked at pretty much did away with the phones. Everything had to be via email, had to be Messenger, had to be Skype, because they wanted a paper trail. Things like Slack and Microsoft Teams allow everything in your office to be in one central place and communicate. Whereas some companies don't even like computers. They're all paper. So you have to know how to write, how to communicate, how to pick up the phone and talk to someone. So, depending upon the type of environment you're comfortable in, make sure you're going to something that is as equally as comfortable, or at least be aware of how they communicate so that you can prepare yourself before changing jobs. Skills in IT and really non IT, a lot of skills from the technical side of things you can look at are what type of computer systems do they use? Are they a Mac, Windows, or Linux shop? This can be huge if you pretty much have grown up learning Linux or grown up using Mac, and then you try to jump to Windows. There's a little bit of a learning curve, and vice versa. If all you know is Windows, going to Linux can be very scary. So, going from one environment to another, make sure you have the right skills there. Microsoft Office or something else. Some people, if they're in the Linux world, know only Libre or Open Office, which nowadays pretty much translates the same to Microsoft Office, but there are some caveats. You just may need to learn or take a little online course on how to do one or the other. Is this a mixed technology shop? Do you have to have a variation of different skills across different technologies? .NET versus Java versus PHP. Again, communication skills, leadership skills. Are you required to be a team lead? Are you going from a position where you were kind of leading a team, but now you're required to manage a team? Finally, can you adapt what you know to something else? Timing. This one's huge. So it's not all about your skills, the jobs that are available can also be reflected by timing. Compensation tends to be better when markets are up and companies are profitable. If the markets are in a downturn, there's tends to be fewer opportunities to find employment. And typically, even the jobs that are available have lower compensations. So it's kind of like the housing market. When times are good, it's kind of a buyer's market, or in the case of employees, it's a shopper's market. If it's a downturn, it's the companies. Hey, we can get someone with good skills cheap. Are you willing to relocate? So sometimes, timing wise, if you're tired of where you're at, sometimes the cost of living where you're at can be high. So, like if you're out in LA, the cost of living is extremely high. You may make a lot of money. However, if you're willing to relocate and say there's a big tech boom going on in Nashville with all the healthcare companies moving here, and it's like, well, the cost of living there is cheaper. I can still make a decent amount of money moving there. Sometimes relocating can save you money and make you more money. So the cost of living goes down, that your commute goes down, therefore the pay you make actually goes up. Can you put off changing a job for a little while? Are you in a situation where you have to change jobs today? I mean, it's so hostile. I mean, you're ready to kill your boss. Okay, that's time to get out, find something else. But if you're in a situation where, yeah, things are just kind of mulling along, I'm doing my job, I just don't feel fulfilled, but the markets are down and there's nothing out there right now that I can really jump to, wait a little while. Doesn't mean you stay idle though. Start going out, start talking to people, start networking, start teaching yourself some new skills so that as soon as the markets start turning up and more jobs become available, you're ready, you're there, you have an updated resume, you can hit the ground running. Has a company changed hands? Is the company you're working for going bankrupt? Did it get bought out? What is the current situation within the company? In these situations, sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes the changing of the hands, so to speak, will shift the company's paradigm in such a way that you have to find another job. For instance, if you're working in a company where it's Java and the new CEO comes in and now everything's PHP, suddenly your skill set's not so much in demand in that company. You really don't have anywhere to go, nowhere to grow. So it's time to maybe jump ship and find something else. Another thing to look at is if you're in, say, the government sector or you're dealing with, say, Lockheed Martin, and they're doing a huge amount of work with the government, and say suddenly, hey, we're now in peacetime. There's no more need for all those weapons or military ships and that. Well, okay, the company is now going to have to lay off a bunch of people. Maybe it's time to start looking. Or is your skill set in high demand? Think back to Y2K. Anyone who knew COBOL or some of the older assembly languages and that, they were seriously in high demand. They were banking it. They were making tons of money during the Y2K crisis because if the machines were not fixed, things could break, planes could crash, markets would fall. So another thing to think about. So if your skill set's in high demand right now, maybe now's the time to jump because maybe you can make a significant amount of money or find that better job doing exactly what you love to do. So when you're ready to look, here's some of the places to start. Start with social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, different job sites, Indeed, Monster.com, career builders, word of mouth networking. These could be just going to the coffee shops or going out to local meet and greets and meetups. Meetups are like the Java meetups or technical meetups or even planning meetups. So, like if you're a convention planner or a party planner, they have meetups for that. So, look in your areas, find things that will get you out and talking to the people in the jobs that you want to look for. Who knows? You might be talking to someone over coffee and find out, hey, they're the CIO or they're a manager at this other company and they happen to have a job available that you might work for. So, how do you prepare once you find a job, or how do you get things ready? So, some things you can do here: take some online classes, do some training, do some research online. So, if you find you have an interview, go online, research the company, see if you can find the manager on LinkedIn, see if you can find other employees that work there and see what they say about the company. Do some mock interviews, have a friend write down some questions or Google, find some questions related to your job position, and do a mock interview. Make sure you dress up to impress. And there are many different things you can do to prepare. So it just kind of depends on your situation and the industry. So again, though, make sure you, if you can, take the time and do some online training courses, talk to people, network. And finally, it's time to pull the trigger. I've accepted a job with someone else. Now what do I do? Well, you need to make sure you prepare an exit strategy. And by that, I mean make sure you give proper notice. So if you're in a job that you can give 2 weeks, give 2 weeks. However, if you're in a legal type job or you're in some other type job that has a lot more constraints that you can't just kind of pull yourself out without things really falling apart, give them a little more notice. Sometimes you can give 30 days notice and the next employer will be understanding because if you're willing to give that to your previous employer, if you were to leave your new position, they would understand that you would give them the same kind of attention as well as the same kind of time between you leaving and going somewhere else. Make sure you've documented any training materials or notes for your successor. Even if you absolutely detest or hate your job, do something like this. Outline what you're doing, give your manager kind of an idea of what your day to day tasks is, because they may not know. If you've been there for 20, 30 years, you may do other tasks that are not within your job description, but yet you're the one that does them. And if you were to leave, it would fall through the cracks. Doing that does two things. One, it kind of lays out that you know what you're doing and you kind of set a standard for the person that comes behind you so that they're not lost. And two, it sets yourself as an employee that the company may want to bring back because you took the time to basically prepare them for the next person, that you're not leaving them in a lurch. Clean up your personal files. This one's big. A lot of people don't think about it, but over the course of time, you can accumulate a lot of personal stuff at work, be it pictures, files, things you save on your desktop. Make sure you take the time to clean it up because you don't want to accidentally leave like a 401k document or any HR documents or any personal documents on a computer that someone else could potentially find. Try to avoid a bidding war. You were looking for a reason. So, bidding wars could be fun, perceivably in the employee's mind. It's great. People are bidding over me. I'm going to make a lot of money. Except if your current employer is making a counter bid, take a moment to take a step back and stop and say, wait a minute. I was looking to leave this company for a reason. If and only if it was financial, then maybe consider staying put. However, if it's financial, why is it financial? Are they just not able to give you raises every year? Did you hit your financial ceiling or your salary ceiling at your current company? Even if you take that money to stay, you may still be hurting yourself in the long run. So don't necessarily get into a bidding war. If the company does offer that you're at does offer you a little bit more than the bid to go to this other company, look at it. Is the job that you're going to go to have upward mobility and the ability to make more money over time than where you're at? And also save up some money beforehand before you change jobs. A lot of people don't think about this, but sometimes, well, most of the time, there is a small period where you don't have money. If you're going from a company where you get paid biweekly, if you go to another company where you get paid, say, twice a month, you could go a week or two without a paycheck. And you still have to pay your bills. You still have to provide for your family. You still have to eat. Still have to put gas in your car. So make sure you do save up some money ahead of time. If you're really tight for money, eat ramen for a couple weeks. Don't drive anywhere. You only have to do this for a short period of time. Just make sure you have that little buffer before you jump. That way, you're not stressing over finances while you're trying to deal with the stresses of a new job. Finally, let's recap. So, we've discussed some of the fears people run into when looking to change jobs. We've talked about some of the myths and misconceptions, the pink unicorns, the Dilbert pointy haired bosses, some of the things that you really shouldn't be afraid of, or some of the myths and some of the misconceptions you may have about changing jobs really don't exist. Put yourself out there. Try to find something else when you're ready. And we've talked about things to consider when looking for that next job, the different things of like compensations, timing, skills, the different places to look for your new job, Indeed. Heck, worst case scenario, if you really don't know where to go or how to do it, or how to find another job, go talk to a recruitment service. They're wonderful utilities to use. Just be warned that they do get a piece of compensation for finding talent. So you may not get as big a pay bump going to the next job if you use a recruitment service. However, that's not a bad thing. You could always use them to get to your next job, build up your skills, learn the process. So the next time, maybe you don't need a recruiter. And finally, we discussed pulling the trigger. Now, getting the job, what you need to do to solidify where you're at so you can leave cleanly and kind of leave yourself as a good employee that the company would like to bring back, or at least give a good reference to in the future. Thank you. We know your time is important. And if you would like to discuss any additional questions or comments you have, you can check us out on info@developer.com. You can check us out on developer.com/contact us. We're on Twitter @developer, and we're also on facebook.com @developer. Our goal is making every developer better. So please check us out, ask us questions, and check out some of our other videos. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh yeah, I mean, I pretty much enjoyed this presentation, but for some reason I don't know. I mean, you've changed my mind. I've always thought like people tend to leave jobs. Like I was thinking like 90% is because of money, and the reason why I'm saying that is like at LKQ we have like a high turnover, for instance, especially in networking. But the reason was because like they were not paying what the market value was. Like I think last year we lost like four uh, network engineers I mean, within a span of a month, and they had even to change the manager. And the new one they got, he brought in his team, and the guys who had stayed, then he gave them a raise immediately. So this one has pretty much given me a good perspective.
Well, and there are situations like that too. And that it was kind of where I was talking about where the industry could be in an upturn or a downturn. So if markets are up, jobs tend to people tend to offer more money for that type of position. So in your particular situation, it could have been when the company was established, they set their salary levels at the current industry level at that time, but now the industry's changed, so they're losing employees because of that compensation. Now, that doesn't mean they're not necessarily just jumping ship because of compensation. It could also be, hey, I can do the same thing for someone else, but with other opportunities. So it sounds like your new manager came in, kind of reset the bar, and is moving things forward the right way. So again, I mean, it can be both, but really, you don't necessarily want to just jump ship just because of compensation.
Yeah, gotcha.
I want to say something about that, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's interesting because I don't want to contradict it because there is. I think the key is the full sentence that Michael just said is that you don't want to jump ship strictly because of compensation. Um, However, that being said, is I think there is, particularly when this is a real challenge, is when you're starting out. Um, Definitely when you're starting out, I don't think people understand what fair compensation is. I've run into more than a few people, and actually, I mean, there are companies that make their money on people not understanding what their worth is, particularly some unnamed consulting type companies that will, they'll find people, and honestly, there's a lot of them, and it's the nature of the business, particularly in IT, that you get kids coming out of college that don't understand what their worth is. They're used to college students and they're making minimum wage or a little bit above that, 10, 11, 12 bucks an hour. I think minimum wage, I think, is like 8.50 now. So you can be working at McDonald's, I guess, and make 10 bucks, 11 bucks an hour. Well, if a consulting company comes in and they basically pay you 20 bucks an hour, that's a huge leap in your pay. And that may be, depending on where you're at, that may be fair compensation, but it also may not be. Particularly if they're going to make their money, so they're going to charge at least, they're going to make at least 40%. So if you figure if they pay you 20 bucks an hour, they're going to be at least billing you out for whatever that is, 28, 30 bucks an hour, which is fine and dandy. But and that probably, those numbers actually probably are more or less realistic for somebody coming straight out of college. But once you get a year or two of experience, I think there's depending on what you do and how you do it, and particularly the focus we have from the developreneur world is that if you're aggressively pursuing your career, your first couple of years, you should see a pretty steep increase in your value. Personally, I know when I started out, I moved the first couple of jobs I moved, which were roughly in the 12 to 24 month a jump period. I was able to make 20% increases in my salary. And if you're able to do something like that, particularly early on, I think I have to say you should do it. If you want to essentially make bank, if you want to say, hey, I've increased my value enough that after a year or 18 months at a job, particularly early on, that I can make that kind of a leap, it's really hard to argue against it. Now, somebody may, Michael mentioned job hopping and stuff like that, and somebody may hold that against you and say, well, you're only in it for the money. But it's like, how many people, given a 15 or 20% increase in pay, is not going to do that? You're not just in it for the money. I mean, at that point, yeah, the money may be a prime motivator, but you're not just in it for them. I mean, if somebody gives you an extra bag of money, it's hard to say no. That's sort of just being smart. Now, that being said, there is also, all jobs are not created equal. So you could easily take a lot of money, and part of the reason you're being offered that is because you're going into a job that is not going to be fun, or that is a dead end job, which is, again, I think a big challenge when you're starting out, is to take a look what is it you're going into. It may be that you're going into a job that is like a dead or dying technology, a maintenance job, or something that a year from now you're not um, increasing your value to the market. Maybe even to maybe to that employer. Maybe you will be increasing your value to them and it'll be worthwhile to them, but maybe not. Maybe even there you're sort of in a role where your skills 12 months from now are not providing you're not bringing anything more to the table than you were when you started. And I think regardless of where you are in your career, you want to avoid that.
And that kind of brings up my point where don't change jobs just for the money, because yes, someone may be throwing you 25% increase in pay, but yeah, that could be one of the contributors to you leaving and taking that job. But really, especially if you're just starting out, you should also be looking at things like, what else can I learn from this company? Will this help improve my skills in the long term? Will this help me grow and improve my self-worth over time? Because even if, like you just said, if you take the money, you could end up in just a support job, or you could end up in a dead-end job where, yeah, you're starting out, but now you've just put yourself in a hole.
Yeah, and that's why I said I started this saying um, this is a yeah, and you and I talked a little bit about this before even getting into this presentation. Is I think that there's a lot of danger, and we've seen this. I know you and I have talked about this. There's a lot of danger in taking pieces of what you presented here and sort of take them and run. Whereas I think you have to, I think really, if you want to really map a good career path, you have to take the whole thing that you presented. As you talked about, I think there's more to a job than any one of these pieces. It's more than compensation. It's more than the skills. It's more than the people you're working with. It's more than your boss. It's more than your company. It's more than your industry. If you really want to do it right, you have to take this holistic approach, which is really looking at all of the things that you've just laid out in this presentation, and not don't sell yourself short in any like, and look at from this presentation, looking from that point of view, is don't like look at one slide and say, okay, well, this is what I need to I need to worry about not being fearful, or I need to worry about the environment or the industry or anything like that. Is that you really do um, you need to really think of that, look at the big picture, and sit down and and I think that's sort of like the underlying thing that Michael laid out that I think it's important to take away from this, is that it should not be a snap judgment. There should be a plan. Where are you going? What are you going to do when you get there? And even, which I really liked at the end that you brought up, is sort of okay, once I've pulled the trigger, there's some other considerations there. And I think that's very important to think about when you do pull the trigger, that a lot of times are forgotten. Now, Michael and I, we've moved enough times and been in enough situations, me in particular, that those are like second nature to me. But if you've only done it once or twice, you may not think about the fact that, hey, I need to, there needs to be a little bit of a buffer. Is that there may be some period of time where I'm not, where the paychecks maybe don't overlap or benefits don't overlap. I've got to be in a situation to be able to handle this kind of stuff. There's work that I need to wrap up with my existing employer or customers or whatever before I to just be ethical, I guess, basically, is for lack of a better term, is there's certain things I'm going to need to be able to wrap up to do a proper handoff. I need to be able to make sure that whatever files and data and emails and stuff like that I have, that I can access them if they're mine. If it's stuff that I should be able to access, I want to make sure that I've got that stuff set up in a place in a way that I can access them. Or if it's not, I need to make sure that those get handed off to people properly. And there's things like that. There's a lot that goes into it, and I think it is something. And it maybe just be personally, but I think as you get further into your career, each time there's going to be more involved. There's more work involved. And I think that's part of why, as you get further in your career, you should be open to the idea that if you decide that you're going to move to another job, it will take you longer to find one that makes sense. Which goes to something he made. Michael mentioned early on, is you don't want to just like grab the first thing available, because that's probably not going to work. And maybe it will occasionally, but more often than not, it's probably not going to be the best way to go. You need to be patient and intentional when you do make those moves.